A very good morning to you all from where I am joining in the world, and a good evening from where our rest of the panelists are joining.
आप मुझे
It is
बता के
my-
जाओगे ना? हाँ, नहीं आप जाओगे, मुझे बता के जाओगे. Okay. Hi, Mishi. I'm free.
Perfect, sir. Very glad to have you. Looking forward to it. I'm just starting the introduction. As I said, just housekeeping. For now, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself because there is a little problem with recording otherwise, and ambient noises also slip in. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our panel on reconciling states' interests with digital life. We have a very esteemed panel with us. We have Mr. Manish Tiwari, who's a member of parliament from Indian National Congress. He was also the former INB minister. We have Professor Manoj Jha. He's a member of Rajya Sabha. We have Dr. Gulshan Rai, who was the former cybersecurity coordinator of Government of India, but he also has so many other various designations he's had. We have Ms. Anuradha Bhasin. She's the editor of Kashmir Times. We have Mr. Faisal Farooqi. He's the founder of mouthshut.com. And we will soon also be joined by Ms. Sairi Chahal. She's the founder of Sheroes. So the problem with inviting very accomplished people is that their profiles are really long. And if I were to keep reading what all these people have done, then that's all what we will do for a very long time. So I will spare you that. SFLC.in and LiveLaw, who are the co-organizers of this panel, they're constantly running Know Your Panelists on social media platforms, whichever is your preference. This particular conversation is also being live streamed and available on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. And that's where you can also learn about our panelists and much more interesting things. Like you can read Mr. Tiwari's recent opinion piece on the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, which got published yesterday. You can read about Dr. Rai's piece on India's new cybersecurity policy, how it should be or what it should look like compared to the 2013 one. You can learn about Professor Jha's interest in Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb and his favorite book. The writer is also a favorite of my father's. Faisal's inputs on health policy, Anuradha's crucial reporting on Kashmir, and Sairi's community celebrating her each day with heartwarming messages. Before we actually start the discussion, here are some housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And I know that it's a reflex action to start speaking, but we have to go through the process of muting, unmuting each time you start talking. Otherwise, we'll have to remind you. We will have opening statements of 5 minutes each from each of the panelists. And then we will have 3 questions. It's a question and answer round. I'll pose one question to each of the panelists and we'll go that way 3 times. We've also allocated 15 minutes for audience interaction. But because these questions are being sent to us through social media, so the team will be sending the questions to me and then I will posing them to you. That's how this is structured. A sincere thanks to SFLC.in and their team, LiveLaw, and all of you esteemed panelists for joining us. And last but not the least, each one of you who is watching from home or who will be watching this video, I know there are many interesting things and you're doing everything behind the screens these days. So put this also on the list of several things you must do. If you have landed here expecting zingers, some gotcha moment, or expecting that I'm going to put people on spot or have a partisan discussion, then you might consider other webinars than this one and move on to them. Because here we are only interested in a constructive dialogue amongst stakeholders who may be viewing the same issues or problems from a distinct lens. This naturally can lead to some difference of opinions, but we cannot make universal policies for development that respect our rights, ensure that state fulfills its duties, and innovation flourishes if we are all always talking past each other on orthogonal matters. That is why this is not to prove anybody right or wrong, but to present very complicated problems, because hard things are hard and they can only be solved when a lot of smart people come together. Other than me, everybody else here is very accomplished. As I said, please check their profiles out on social media. And now we will just start. Today is the anniversary, 365 days of no to slow internet in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. What started with a complete communications blockade has now turned into a 2G postpaid game with several litigations, affidavits, and committees. But still the authorities insisting that restoration of 4G mobile internet is not desirable at this time in the Supreme Court. But the Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir expressing his hope and desire that the special committee will restore the 4G mobile internet service and that high-speed internet connectivity will not pose any problem. As we all watch Digital India load at 2G speeds for those in Jammu and Kashmir, India also tops the world in the number of internet shutdowns. 55 imposed in 2020 alone and 433 in total since 2012 per internetshutdowns.in. But the authorities also tell us that most of these internet services are suspended as a precautionary measure amidst a terror encounter or to check spread of rumors or violence after heinous crimes like rape, mostly because people protest, get together swiftly and mobilize like never before. At that time, we are told, Madam, your free speech is not important. For me, it is important to save lives. Citizens are entitled to secure private conversations, but authorities are also tasked with ensuring that crimes are solved and criminals are set to task. The authorities insist that without backdoors or information sharing ability with companies that make such products for citizens, crime resolution is a real issue. So that is why we see requirements like mandatory traceability being sneaked into law. As citizens are trying to understand the details of how to balance these interests, we also see news of spying, of vulnerability through a video call feature of WhatsApp by their own government. And that leaves citizens wondering what should be their stance. They do want safety and agree with the authorities on one side, but they also want sanctity of private communications. Spreading of rumors lead to real life lynchings, but the platform companies, if they're not based out of the country, they raise their hands and say, Lex loci server, don't put my Indian entity because we're only a sales office, ask my California or Irish one. And then the authorities are left to wonder, how do they actually fulfill their duty? And citizens wonder, what is going on here? I have enough to do in my life that wonder about all these issues. Data protection bill is pending for several years. And when a draft is introduced, state agencies are exempted. Government says that if we are not exempted, how do we carry out national security duties? How do we carry out surveillance duties? And how do we negotiate our foreign relations? Then the government bans Chinese apps for geopolitical reasons that may be justified in the short term, but there is also the reason about data leakages. And the citizens wonder that why, when the Indian apps or the various other news are coming, what is being done at the home front for them? There is a lot of requirement for better cybersecurity for bettering for our infrastructure, especially the critical infrastructure, to be well equipped to deal with all that is put out in the world. But there is also this question of where does everybody stand? The government during this pandemic rightly wants to find efficient ways of contact tracing in a populated country like ours, but then forces everyone to download a piece of ineffective technology and yo-yos between mandatory and voluntary Arogya Setu, which we are later told will be used to build data, use data to build a national health stack by private companies. Is this all a problem where the state's interests and citizens' interests are so divergent from each other that we cannot find a common ground? Or is it something else? Perhaps, is this a trust deficit? Is it the problem of transparency? Or the problem of what is being told and not being followed? Walking the walk and talking the talk are quite divergent. That is what we will be exploring today with a panel that has someone to represent each stakeholder's point of view and help us see how do we come together to reconcile these conflicting interests in a digital life when all of us are negotiating every aspect of our life behind the screens. And all of us also want most innovation to flourish in the country, citizens' rights to be protected, national security also to have the ability to protect us at our borders and be able to make sure that any data leakages, any cybersecurity issues are handled in the most professional manner. Now, we will start with, as I said, opening statements by each panelist for 5 minutes. If you want to take the entire time, please do so, but respect that time. And thereafter, once the opening statements are done, we will move on to Q&A. It's a randomized order, but let's start with Mr. Tiwari. If you would start with your opening statement, sir, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chaudhary, and my felicitations to all my fellow panelists and all those who have joined us virtually at this point in time from different time zones and geographies in the world. The context of today's discussion is the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, 1 year after the abrogation of Article 370 and Article 35A, which provided a special status for the state of Jammu and Kashmir in the Constitution of India. However, there is a much broader canvas of issues that Ms. Chaudhary put on the table in her introductory remarks. And it reminds me of something which I have said ad nauseum, and at the risk of repetition, may I just reiterate it, that the internet was perhaps the most audacious experiment in anarchy. And it has succeeded. Never before, the internet represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. Never before has so much power concurrently resided on so many fingertips around the world. There is more data which is churned out on a daily basis than from the beginning of civilization till the turn of the 20th millennium. The future of the human civilization lies on the crossroads or on the intersection of a brick and mortar civilization which took over 20 millennia to evolve and a virtual civilization that is concurrently evolving. And therefore, you have the contradictions and you have the dilemmas that Ms. Chaudhary outlined in her open remarks. Fundamentally, because what you're seeing is that the Westphalian state that we knew going back to 1648 and the Treaty of Westphalia, when nation states came into existence, that concept has been eroded by the borderless world, which the internet has sought to create. However, conversely and ironically, when you look at the current pandemic that we are all living under, all responses to that pandemic have been national or subnational. So therefore, you have this very unique paradox whereby you have a virtual civilization which allows us to interact with each other, but you have a physical civilization which has really come down to the borders of the doorstep outside your home. And I don't think anything outlines this irony more than what Jammu and Kashmir has really witnessed over the past 365 days, where in addition to a virtual shutdown, you had a physical shutdown which has gone on for many months, whereby schools have been closed, colleges have been closed, people have been unable to get about their daily lives, do their businesses. The economic loss is completely incalculable. But this situation which has developed today is not something which has actually happened overnight. I think the Indian state made a fundamental mistake going 7 decades back when it could not decide whether it wanted the people or it wanted the territory called Jammu and Kashmir. So therefore, the approach of the Indian state, and when I talk about the Indian state, I go across the continuum of governments, has been to use hard power in order to hold the territory rather than bring people on board. There have been sporadic attempts over a period of time to try and get the people also into the mainstream. Some of them have been successful, as demonstrated by the electoral turnouts in 2002, 2008, 2014. But almost as a reflex, we've reverted back to the use of hard power whenever people's aspirations or people's anxieties have collided with the interests of the state. And what we are currently witnessing, where even the writ of habeas corpus stands suspended in Jammu and Kashmir, over 600 habeas corpus matters are pending in the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, where political leaders are incarcerated without a formal process, and people are unable to deal with the double whammy of the 1 year lockdown and the pandemic, because they are not allowed to access 4G technologies, primarily because 4G technologies can also be used for other purposes. And I would just end by saying that in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, there is an externality called Pakistan, and Pakistan has been trying to bleed India with 1,000 cuts, going back to their decision in Multan in 1972, post the dismemberment of Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh, that A, will get a nuclear bomb, and B, will bleed India with 1,000 cuts. The first frontier was Punjab in the 80s and 90s. It extended to Jammu and Kashmir, and now the whole country is fair game. And I'll stop at that because we've run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The virtual civilization you talked about, we'll come back to that in that context. Can we move now perhaps to Dr. Rai for your opening statement, sir?
Thank you, Mishi, for inviting me and giving me opportunity to share the dice with the honorable lawmaker, the member of parliament, and the other distinguished panelists there. So good evening to the honorable member of parliament. All of them I know very well, and I have a deep regards to them. I convey my deep regards once again through this forum to all of them. Mishi, I think that the issues which you have raised and which Mr. Tiwari had put it in the opening remarks, he has laid down the good preamble and good background to the issues there. Today, we are in the digital era, and this digital technology is not as simple as we have seen that when we used to study. I remember my days when I was studying, and I remember the days when I teach, and I see my son or other student doing it. Today we are dealing with a technology which is a multi-edged sword, not a single-edged sword, but a multi-edged sword. This technology is virtual, this technology is a borderless, and this technology is also a anonymous kind of a things there. That's one. The other feature of the technology is that it is continuously getting innovated. We keep on hearing the buzzwords of the artificial intelligence and the big data and the machine learning. We keep on hearing the big word, and we used to hear the big words for quite some time. But today, these big words, these words are really, we can see in a practical sense doing that. These technologies has put us in a flat society, a flat network. You are sitting in the New York and New Jersey. I'm sitting in New Delhi, and all other members, my honorable members, panelists are sitting at different locations there. So we are all connected in a flat network, a flat society. Yeah. We can talk, we may see each other's face. So we are dealing at any point of a time with a multiple technologies, not a single technology. We are dealing with the multiple technology. I can write, it can be converted into text, it can be converted to speech, and vice versa. That kind of a scenario we have come, and the scenario what is going to be very difficult. The other factor which has come, that's why I said convergence of technologies, is that the use of encryption, hiding the information which is there, which has become a much more prevalent mode, whether we want to do the privacy aspect, or we want to do securing aspect, or we want to hide my identity there, is has become a very prevalent mode of communication. Now let us see the communication part. Today I remember when I was a member of the committee when we were in 1997, there was a big arguments and going on. Abdul Kalam committee was there to give the internet, opening the internet and licensing internet there. I remember, and we all said, and after fighting with a member department telecommunication, we gave the license. We said 1 rupee a license there, because the other members were really forceful members were there. They forced it 1 rupee license there. And we forced Department of Telecommunication to release monopoly there and canalizing there, all those factors. We hope that. So the communication we saw is going to be a core component of what the digitalization or the digital age we are talking about there. Now today, whether we talk about the economic security, economics, whether we talk about the education, we talk about the national security, any aspect you talk about it, the crux and the core component is this technology there. You can look at this civilization, which Mr. Tiwari mentioned. If you look at from the technology angle, you look at a different perspective, a different kind of aspect you look at it. So this technology, as I said, is a multi-edged sword there. It brings a lot of useful objective, lot of useful activity, productivity, efficiency to us. At the same time, the same technology is used in a purpose which is not that positive and constructive purpose. I can use it for different purposes there. And some of the technology which I mentioned, particularly the encryption or hiding the things, virtuality, borderless, anonymous kind of things there, is a issue which is also being used for the negative purposes by the perpetrators also to do that. So now the entire thing is becoming a complex scenario. Not only complex scenario, it has become an issue of a geopolitical issues have come up there. And we have seen how in the case of Corona also, The charge on what is the charge on WHO that they didn't share the data, China didn't share the data. It's just sharing the data, it's just sharing the information there. So information, data, and technology, it has become a geopolitical kind of a consideration there. At one point of a time, the technology company didn't have any much interest. They were engaged in developing technologies, and they never interfere with the government. There was a license kind of a Raj there. The government had full control. Today, whether we talk about any political system, whether it's Russia or China or India, wherever, there are a lot of private sector is playing a role, and the government control is certainly weakening to the extent, to a large extent, when we look at about 15, 20 years ago. That's a scenario. A lot many technologies are coming up. And at times, the technologies which we are talking about it, they are not in the direct or exact control, even of the people who have developed it, who have installed it, who are maintaining, and who are operating it. So we are in a very, very complex scenario where geopolitical issues have come up there. And that's why the issues of the privacy, issues of the security. Now, if we look at the issues of other aspects have come up there, and we are all talking about what UN Charter and all kind of a thing where everyone is talking about. So multiple issues have come up. These are all the geopolitical interests there. Try to resolve one issue, other issue becomes difficult. The one important factor is there. Everyone talks about the technology. They want to control the technology. They want to avoid the misuse of the technology. But actually, no state is interested to check the misuse of the technology, because this technology gives them the leverage on the other. That is a complete hypocritical kind of a system in the things there. This one system where non-state actor and the state actors are working together. There is hardly any state actors which comes directly in the picture. It's only last year that the direct attribution came up, and one of the state actors admitted, yes, they did this kind of a thing. Otherwise, till today also, most of the activities are carried out to non-state actor, and the state actors are behind. So issue of attribution, whether we talk about any case you take it, issue of attribution, issue of privacy, issue of the AI algorithm, same artificial intelligence algorithm, which can be your friend, it become an enemy. Second moment or the second minutes there, it becomes your enemy also. So we are in a complex scenario. We are in a really very complex scenario, and technology is playing a deep role, impacting the businesses, impacting the society, and the very fabric it needs to that. So it calls for a appropriate measures, and we have to see how do we do about it. Multi-stakeholders, more stakeholders are there, we need to look at it. Thank you.
Sir. Great, thank you, sir. So you talked about how education is changing. I know, Professor Jha, you are an educator first, and you're also a lawmaker. So let's move to Professor Jha for his opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Mishi. Thanks, everybody on the panel. I'll begin with an anecdote, which is not exactly an anecdote. It's a part of the lived experience we had, but it has anecdotal value for me. Last year, on 5th of August, when Article 370 was being abrogated and 35A, some of us had spoken vociferously. I had cited none other than Jayaprakash Narayanji, his continuous position on and non-negotiable kind of position on Kashmir. So the other day, probably some television channel in Pakistan showed some of those speeches, including mine. So 2-3 television channels in India, they said, oh my God, look, they are being loved in Pakistan. I was worried for a time because I also never thought I'll appear in Pakistani press and with other great colleagues of mine. Recently, on after the all-party meet, when our honorable Prime Minister said no intrusion in case of China in Galwan, his speech was actually shown multiple times in China. Uh, what worried me that those channels did not say that why he was being made so popular in China. So when I look at it since 5th of August last year and today, I'll tell you, I listened to Gulshan Rai ji, Manish Bhai. Uh, I'm worried as a citizen. You know why? Since our childhood, we learned in one line, Kashmir is an integral part of India. कश्मीर भारत का जम्मू कश्मीर भारत का अभिन्न हिस्सा है. And I am struggling with this fact that if it is an integral part of India, अगर ये अभिन्न हिस्सा है तो भिन्न व्यवहार क्यों है? Because nothing can explain whatever you say. Today only I read in the newspaper, probably 178 or 180 terrorists have been killed. Only 10 of them were from Pakistan. So there are factors which are causing greater sense of alienation amongst the people. I mean, Anuradha ji knows very well. We have had long discussion a few years back in Kathmandu. There used to be a thing called mainstream in Kashmir. Whether internet shut down or shutting down the people, I always say, मैंने parliament में भी कहा था कि you have to decide, the government, and I won't only say this government has gone little ahead, but whether you want territory of Kashmir or you want people of Kashmir. Because no nation, no nationalism can ever survive if there is no emotional component to it. Whether you read Renan or even Benedict Anderson, who says nation is an imagined community, there is an element of emotion. That emotional quotient or component, I think we have destroyed that. And I won't say inadvertently, it has been very consciously destroyed. Now, the highest court of the land is yet to hear the urgent issues with respect to, say, the constitutionality of the J&K Reorganization Act. We were hit by a pandemic in between, but let's see the trajectory of how it has unfolded. I think it doesn't get us any medal or certificate when we are quoted as a nation which has maximum number of shutdown days. This also is a kind of, I would say, a civilizational question. India as a nation, as a civilization, I think we, even in those days when we were not dreaming of $5 trillion economy, we occupied a moral canvas in the world. And that moral canvas gave us a position to talk about the decolonization process or the speaking eye to eye to those parts. Now, since then, this amounts to a regressive journey to me. I believe if you look at component wise, let's go with business, which is very important these days in India, even at the cost of human relations, or those indicators should have mattered, which should have mattered most. Now, Kashmir Chamber of Commerce, their data is out in the open. 40,000 crores, if I'm not wrong, that has been lost. I can give you examples of students. Somebody had to submit a proposal of PhD with me. You know, she missed one session. One session in a PhD or MPhil program means almost 1 year. Now, these are the human cost of shutdown. I understand you say cybersecurity reasons and blah, blah, blah. Is there any data which tells us that with these kind of measures, the correlation established is this? No, sir. No. Israel has done a lot better than us. But what has Israel achieved in the entire Gaza Strip or other Palestinian areas? I think as a nation, as a people, we must come back to the table once again and realize that the sense of alienation which I see in Kashmiri people, students, they don't open up. What I said earlier, I I'll speak one line and finish. You know, one of my student had told me this, the entire idea of human right actually acquires a different proportion and a different face the moment it crosses Jawahar Tunnel. Now, this is a policy. This is a policy which we must reevaluate. And I'll again go back to Jayaprakash Narayan. He had told to Nehru and Indiraji on two different occasions that please understand, violence cannot be an instrument to keep a territory perpetually in fear. And if he could say this in 56 and close to 72, 73 to Indiraji, I think I would like to read those same letters to the people who occupy, who are in Delhi. And finally, I would say that shutdown is also a kind of violence, because none other than Honorable Supreme Court has realized that shutting down internet and things like that, it's a kind of onslaught and attack on freedom of speech. So ultimately it's a question. It's a question. It's not a very difficult choice. We must understand that what is happening in Kashmir is being watched in spite of internet shutdown. You remember somebody got a Pulitzer Award, and the kind of ridicule that photographer had to face. Those of us who congratulated that photograph, we had to face. And every day we live with a kind of narrative, anti-Kashmir, anti-Muslim, going berserk. Many of them pure product of imagination of those anchors who sit in comfortable rooms. But the prices are being paid. And last, I'll tell you, when I asked one of my students, did you all watch the debate? He said it very clearly, sir, the debate was not for us. It was done to us. Thank you so much, Mishi, once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Right, starting from Mr. Tiwari's point about this unique paradox and of this digital civilization, and the point he made about India did not decide whether we wanted the territory or the people, to what Mr. Jha said, this sense of alienation, and what Dr. Rai said about that at the international level, no state wants to acknowledge that we are not building cyber peace, we are trying to get into cyber war, and that starts a race to the bottom. We'll get to Ms. Bhasin. And Radha, you know all about internet shutdowns. For those of you who, as Professor Jha said, there is a business cost, but there's also a human cost. Internetshutdowns.in, which tracks the internet shutdowns in the country, also has a section called Lost Voices, where people send text messages or videos or whatever they can about what they are facing when there is a shutdown. Anuradha, your opening statement, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very difficult to pack in so much in 5 minutes, but I'll try my best. I come from a region which is the most complex in the world, and which right now, at least for the last 1 year, has been facing excessive restrictions, and there is just so much to talk about that I would run out of time even if I had to talk 24 hours. But right now, sticking to the topic that how the internet shutdown began, the very foundation of that internet shutdown, the official explanation of that was by invoking security and national interest. And this is a flawed misunderstanding of nationhood, of democracy, because it is based on a principle of inequality. It is based on a tendency that continues to erode the fundamental rights of the people. Internet today is a basic need of the public, and by completely introducing a kind of ban which pushes a certain population behind an iron wall. And not just internet, all communications in Kashmir were shut down on August 5th, 2019, including a landline phone. This was for the first time in my career in the last 30 years that I could not hear anybody. The only voices I could hear were in the Hindu majority districts, or 5, 6 districts of Jammu region. And this region continued to be a little privileged. Even within that, I was more privileged. I was in Jammu, this little privileged oasis, and being an elite, I had the broadband facility, internet facility, whereas the mobile internet facility, even for Jammu region, was off. In the Muslim dominated districts, all communication lines were off. So it created inequality within a region. It created inequality with rest of India, whereas the entire contention of the actions that were taken on August 5th, 2019, taking away the special status of the state, revoking Article 370 and 35A, was that people of Jammu and Kashmir are going to become equal citizens. They are going to be integrated into India. Whereas inequalities were being reinforced. Now, 1 year on, I would like to ask whether the stated goals of equality, whether the stated goals of fighting terrorism by imposing restrictions on people have been achieved. If they have, why after a year J&K is still under a shutdown, as the entire country celebrates the first anniversary of the loss of Kashmir's special status? Why are we still under lockdown? Why has internet not been restored? Why the physical lockdown is here? Right now, they're using COVID pandemic as an excuse. Whereas the fact is that even though the numbers of the pandemic affected people are rising, but as compared to the national average, J&K has contributed only 1 to 2% of people affected by COVID, or people who have died of COVID. So why this kind of discrimination even now? What happened on August 5th last year? It started a period of major loss for the people. The immediate loss, of course, was the lockdown. You take a decision about the future of the people, and those very people were under a lockdown. Who asked them? Nobody did. And after that, the key to the door had been opened, the forbidden key, and several laws have been tweaked ever since, giving central government complete authority to tweak, tamper laws, bring in any laws, start any policies without consultation of the people. There is no political structure, economy is in shambles, society has been impacted, and this has been a major loss. And the loss is one of continuous progression. Looking at internet itself, how has it impacted life? It has pushed information into a black hole. It has completely frozen the media. It froze education. It froze the health system. And even now, after it impacted business, it impacted every sphere of life, and it continues to do so. As J&K moved from one pandemic to another, and particularly Kashmir, where the restrictions have been much more severe, um, the world is talking about the work from home culture, talking about online. These kind of things really do not work in this place very well. So whatever happened, and 1 year on, if you look at what has happened, I think that very notion of equality on the basis of which people of J&K were deprived of their special status has been violated. According to the Indian Constitution, which is a liberal constitution, rights are permanent, restrictions are not. In J&K, the situation is just the reverse. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha. We'll move on to now Sairi. So Sairi, you cater to a community and you deliberately decided to make a business to make it safer for women to be online. It's not that you haven't faced, in fact, the business idea itself solves a problem which we are all struggling with. In the context you've seen, your opening statement, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here, Rishi. So I'd like to start by sharing a quote by Vincent Cerf. He's the founding father of the internet. And he says, information flow is what internet is all about. Information sharing is power. And if you don't share ideas, smart people can't do anything about it. And you remain anonymous and powerless. And I think as a internet entrepreneur, this really speaks out to me. And I find that we can't go a day without our phones, not a day, maybe an hour, maybe, half an hour max. And I think it's unimaginable to imagine an entire state without the internet. I mean, and not just the internet, there are other restrictions in place. And I do think, look, I think we're at a time and place in history where this is not luxury anymore. This is as important as food, air, water, a roof over our head, and internet. It's an enabling tool in our life. It's a carrier of information. It's an employment generator. It is a tool for telemedicine. It is a tool for entrepreneurship. I work with women, and I think for the disfranchised and for people with less mobility, whether it is social mobility or whether it is financial mobility, internet has been a huge enabler. And I think what a shutdown of this nature has done for us is it's pushed a lot of people back. And I think recovery will be a very, very long road. And I do believe that it is, I'm not a political scientist, but it feels highly inhumane to me. Why do to others what you don't want done to yourself? And I think loss of voice, loss of livelihood, loss of income and opportunities, and I think just loss of social status, loss of identity is irreplaceable. And I think as somebody who works with a large number of women across the country, I can tell you that these are steps you don't take back. Once you've tasted freedom, nobody wants to go back to their previous life. And I think we do have some members in Jammu and Kashmir, and obviously they've not been part of the community for almost a year now. We have got some very angry emails from women saying, hey, they can't log in, they can't participate, they can't talk to their peers, they can't learn, they can't enroll for a course online. And look at us, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're living a life online, and we expect millions of people not to have any connection with the rest of the world. And I think it's dark not just in terms of the outcome it is produced. I think it's dark because it really cuts off a very, very basic human need for a lot of people. So I think as a founder, who's building a company online and who knows that all of us can't live without our phones and our internet, this is unprecedented and clearly needs to be called out.
Great. From one founder to the other, Faisal Faruqi, your opening statement, please.
Good evening and good morning, Mishi. Thank you for having me. Being the last speaker is usually fun, and I think it's also makes our life very easy. In 1931, when Edison died, the United States Patent Commissioner resigned. So they asked him, why have you resigned? You're such a successful patent commissioner. And he said, Edison is dead. Everything that had to be invented has been invented. So my job is over. And I think after listening to some very august prominent speakers and people who have such diverse views, very prominent personalities, I feel that everything that had to be said has been said. And I'm just going to be repeating some of these things. What Professor Jha, Ms. Basin, and Sairi, and Honorable Satyabari and Professor Rai have said. But some of the things that I just picked up were that we're narrowing this debate or this seminar today to just Kashmir and Jammu and Kashmir, etc. I think that yes, that has become the microcosm of the large internet shutdown that we are seeing in this country and across a lot of democracies. But I think we also need to understand that the internet shutdown has not just happened in Kashmir. They have been repeatedly taking place across the country in various other districts. I think more than 180 shutdowns in the last 12 months in various, in Rajasthan, the internet just gets shut down because there is some UPSC or state board exam. That to me, is like trivializing the democracy or the democratic procedure that is laid down to control law and order situation. Now, if people are cheating on an exam, you don't shut down the internet of the district. So, personally, I feel, all of you are well aware of the economic consequences, but there are social consequences, and Ms. Basin has emphasized on some of those. Imagine for 5 minutes, just imagine that we had this pandemic and the Honorable Prime Minister came and said, we need 3 weeks, we'll shut down the whole country until 14th of April, etc., which is the lockdown one. And there was no internet. I am sure, and I have interacted with a lot of doctors, I am sure that at least 10% of this country would have had some kind of mental disturbances if there was no internet. Kids would have wreaked havoc at home. The gaming would have been down. Housewife would not have been able to communicate with their families. People who were working would have not been able to successfully work from home, etc. Life would have been mess. Imagine 1918 if we had a major lockdown, and this is 2020. So we have to just, sometimes we have to be empathetic. हमको उस दूसरों के shoes में, we have to just experience what it would be to be in that region, or whichever region. Let's say you're talking about Jammu and Kashmir or Jaipur or some part of Rajasthan or Tamil Nadu where the JARD strike leads to shutdown, etc., etc. We just need to, and as Dr. Gulshan Rai said, the state also needs to balance some of these things. I think the topic today is the balance, the balancing act that we have to. One thing I want to assure, and Professor Rai, Dr. Rai, and other people who have been instrumental in some of the policies and writing the policies, that as Faiz said, Nisar mein teri galiyon pe ay watan, jahan chali hai ras ki koi na sar utha ke chale. I am all there to protect my land. I will sacrifice my land for this country, but don't make me a second-class citizen in my own country. Jahan chali hai ras ki koi na sar utha ke chale. And when you shut down the internet, forget Kashmir, if you shut down the internet in parts of Delhi also, you're almost telling that region, that population, that district, that taluka, that tehsil, कि आपका हिंदुस्तान के साथ ताल्लुक खत्म. And to me that is sacrosanct. इस country के लिए हम जान देंगे, सब जान देंगे. I think the panelists also agree to that they will also give their life for this country. But don't cut them off even for 5 minutes. We start to panic. We have location trackers on our family members because sometimes it becomes so unpredictable where they are. And and we don't know where they are. Work from home, economic loss of Kashmir, somebody pointed out, is being estimated to be 40,000 crores. We have Prime Minister who has come up with a great $5 trillion economic plan, and we should work towards achieving the $5 trillion. But we cannot let that $5 trillion economic plan just become a mirage if we just don't understand the consequences of internet shutdowns. So ek to ye ho gaya that we have to absolutely think that internet is there. It should be there. Under no circumstances it should be shut down. There are times when you feel that you may want to shut down, but even then, I would say I urge you, policymakers out there, that please do not find a solution in internet shutdowns. Think of other solutions. Sairi mentioned about Vint and Cerf. I had the opportunity to share the office floor with Vint and Cerf in 2004. We were on the same floor. And often when I talk to Dr. Vint and Cerf, who's considered the father of internet, he said, my worry about India is not the internet. My worry is about access to the internet. It's about electricity. And this was 2004. Dr. Vint Cerf, I'm sure, will be very proud to say that India is self-sufficient in electricity needs, and almost 700 million people are connected online. But he will be shocked that we are having 180 shutdowns a year. Second, I come from the technology sector. I build technology. I know technology is not perfect. I really understand the loopholes in technology. And that is why, when Dr. Rai said that in 1997, we wanted to decide whether to open the internet or not, etc. We should invite private ISP players, etc. or not. Hats off to you and everybody who fought for private internet, because we SNL dominated, or was the only provider. And VSNL had stifled, had choked our necks. The world was leaping, and we were still paying like 250 rupees an hour to connect to our internet connections. Where is VSNL today? So if you don't open up, Dr. Rai, if you don't open up, and if you stifle with regulation, etc., at some point, market forces will outdo that. VSNL is a dead brand. Tata's acquired it. They promised that they will use the brand, they'll glorify and they'll nurture the brand, but they abandoned it. Great company, VSNL, served us very well. So I know that technology has flaws, and everybody wants the de-encryption keys. Sabko chahiye ki we can spy on somebody else's WhatsApp messages, which are secure, or Signal messages, which are not stored. But there are reasons why security and encryption sometimes are not even as part of the architecture, or even the founders of the company or the programmers and the architects of the company do not have access to those keys. You know why? Because there are rogue elements. There are governments that do not like us. And if we have backdoor entries for our own governments, then hackers of rogue states will also use those backdoors to enter our own critical infrastructure, our own private conversation, our own sensitive conversation. Now imagine if the cabinet, was during the pandemic, was running on Zoom calls and video and private Signal calls and WhatsApp calls. And if there was a backdoor entry, don't you think a lot of other people may have wanted access to that?
On that note, thank you, everyone. I usually am a much more Martinet kind of a moderator, but because I did want all of you to at least present your version, everybody almost took 7 to 10 minutes. So we are running a little bit over time, but I am very grateful for setting the discussion from various angles, as you all did. As rightly pointed out, the context is the 365 days of no to slow internet, but it's about larger issue. The discussion is about this reconciliation, this trust deficit, or the reason where state thinks its interest lies in one place and the citizens are confused and they think their rights and are not being respected. So we're thinking about when tech comes in the larger context, how do we talk about these issues? In the next round, I'm going to do a little rapid fire so that we can hear more and more from each of you. So if I am trying to tell you to just cut off your remarks, please don't think of that as a sign of rudeness, but just agreed to hear more and more from you all. I'm going to start from Mr. Tiwari again. Mr. Tiwari, you were the INB minister, are a lawmaker. Video cameras are everywhere these days. The same cameras that talked about what Mr. Saifuddin Soz is going through and the conflicting statements being made. You wrote about a piece about that, which was published yesterday. The same technology accompanied with facial recognition tech is being rolled out everywhere and used by police to identify protesters. For a very long time, you have talked about intelligence services oversight. In fact, when UPA was in power that time in 2011, also you had introduced a private member's bill. In February 2020, this year, you were also added to the Joint Select Committee to examine the Personal Data Protection Bill. Congress's manifesto in 2019 talked about upholding right to privacy and introducing adequate safeguards against excessive surveillance and monitoring. It's a perfect example of where the state has interests, but citizens also have rights. And for a very long time, we have deferred to what the state requires without parliamentary or judicial oversight. If you could talk about your motivations, your bill, and what your views are, that would really throw light on a very important issue.
Well, Mishi, thank you very much. That bill on intelligence services lapsed when I moved over to the government in October 2012, but I have reintroduced it in the last session of Parliament. It was supposed to be moved on the 27th of March 2020. Unfortunately, the pandemic intervened and the Parliament had to be adjourned. So whenever Parliament meets again, the Intelligence Services Powers and Regulation Bill 2020, which is not liked by the establishment. When I talk about establishment, I go across governments again, is going to hopefully once again become the property of Parliament. See, essentially my motivation was very simple. As a lawyer, I feel that every statutory institution of the government must be underpinned by a proper legal foundation. And when I looked at our intelligence structures and our law enforcement structures, incidentally, the CBI is also an illegal organization. It was held to be illegal by the Guwahati High Court. It's been hanging by the thread of a stay in the Supreme Court since the 6th of November 2013. But when you look across the entire panoply of intelligence and law enforcement organizations, especially state union law enforcement organizations, their legal underpinnings are very tenuous. The National Investigating Agency also, though the Bombay High Court had upheld its constitutional validity, but if somebody was to seriously re-agitate that again, I do not think before a fair court or a bench of fair judges it would really stand the test of law, because law and order is essentially and squarely a state remit in terms of entry 1 and 2 of the state list. So essentially that's what my motivation was. And you're absolutely correct. States are allergic to, at least the Indian state is allergic to any kind of legislative or judicial oversight. At the risk of being a little indiscreet, I can share with you that even with regard to the data protection bill, which is currently under consideration of a parliamentary committee of which I am the member, I'm one of the members, there is a very significant pushback from the state. I mean, we leave it at that for the time being, and that's historically been the case. And I think, unfortunately, because of this anti-defection law or the 10th schedule, which has completely and absolutely sucked democracy out of our legislative institutions, it's failed in its original objective of stopping horse trading, but it has completely smothered democracy So therefore, you do not have that kind of enlightened discourse in parliament where people can vote according to or even debate according to their conscience, constituency, and common sense. And that is why a lot of these very, very vital issues, which go to the heart of the golden triangle, the triangle of rights in the Indian Constitution, 14, 19, and 21, have not been very seriously explored since 1985. And I would be remiss to say that the courts have also, unfortunately, not measured up to the task, not only in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, whereas my colleague Mr. Jha was pointing out, something has been under adjudication for 1 year. I must compliment and congratulate Anuradha ji. She waged a very heroic battle and finally almost got internet to be upheld as a fundamental right. Almost, I think we need another nudge to kind of get there. But be that as it may, why should this have to be a fight every time? Why should the citizens really be fighting? I think that's the job of the people they elect and put into legislative institutions, who unfortunately have not been able to do their duty. And I think there is a very strong case to revisit the 10th schedule, to really at least limit the rigors of the anti-defection law, so that some kind of real debate restarts in our legislative institutions, and especially on questions like this.
Correct. So I wish we had more time to also examine when various other factors of politics are now so intertwined that you can discuss just digital rights or legislation without talking about these various other factors as well. Also, someday we'll also have a discussion how when in opposition we have a different point of view, and when in power we have a different point of view. But to Mr. Tiwari's point, which is different, because your bill was there even at that time and it's still there. Sorry, you were saying, I interrupted you.
Consistent on the intelligence.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say that. But I wanted to move to Sairi to say, to ask this question about, Sairi, those who identify as women are your constituency. The entire business model of Sheroes caters exclusively to women. They are also the people who face most harassment online for expressing political views, their sexuality, or anything which does not fit in our traditional culture. And then they're also subjected to criminal acts like sharing of non-consensual sexual pictures. Government is then asked to protect women, or ostensibly to protect women, is quick to do legislation and says criminal acts, police gets involved, etc., which is also required. We women live in fear for our safety, physical safety also. But laws are made to say we are protecting women without asking that women much. So it's about agency. But also, a lot of times they are said that this kind of monitoring will lead to political censorship of speech. Yeah. So there is this free speech issue, there is this protection safety issues. What are your views about this conundrum? And I will start the 2 minutes timer, please.
All right. So look, my views on this are very, very simple. So we had to take a very stark stand on Sheroes to not allow men into the platform. So we go to the other extreme of doing a gender verification, asking people to self-verify, and then we use our data controls to figure out that this is a women-only space, and turns out that's a huge value to a large number of women. But I think every time a woman undergoes an unsafe experience or an abusive experience on the internet, all our attention goes towards the woman in question. And I think what we really need here is more and more accountability on the side of the perpetrators, on the side of all the people who are misbehaving. And I think over protectionism, over policing is a natural reaction, because again we want to sort of club everything and say, hey, you stay here so the rest of the world can sort of do what they want to do. But I do feel we need mechanisms where any kind of abusive behavior is held to be more and more accountable. So, whether it is anonymous or whether it is calling women, and there, of course, very, very extreme cases of violence and sharing their personal information on the internet. And I do feel we need controls like public registries of such cases, data sharing amongst various platforms. But do not focus on the women in question, focus on the perpetuators, and that itself changes the direction of our effort. And I think every time something like this happens, we forget that there is somebody who's doing this. All of this hasn't happened all by itself. And we got to spare the women, and we got to go after the bad guys.
Great. For sticking for 2 minutes also to that time limit, I'm going to now start enforcing it a little much more. Faisal, I'm going to come to you. You're the businessman who wants to make a good product, have the trust of his customers, don't want state interference as a business, but also you want access to large swaths of data, because you come and tell every time anybody steps in or asks something, then innovation is stifled, the most common phrase used by businesses. But a lot of times citizens are left to feel that the fat cats, that is the government and the businesses, have made a deal, and the civil society is there for the pictures later on. Is it different? Or as also a person who's a user as well as a producer, how do you balance those conflicting interests? And what do you see the role of business, who do want to make this great products coming out of India, but also don't want a very light regulation? So your time starts now.
It's a very good question. Mishi, thank you for raising it up. I personally feel that technology businesses and all-encompassing businesses that produce any kind of data, they have an inherent trust that they have gained from the customers. And that is why we have access to that data, either voluntarily, which the users have provided, or through data mining and algorithms that we use to make meaningful data and insights out of it. I personally feel that, that we are custodians of that data. All technology companies should feel that they are custodians of that data, and they are not the sole owners and everything, and they should have a very, very transparent privacy policy and how their data is collected and how their data is used. Now, having said that, I definitely feel that businesses should have access to large number of data, because that's how innovation and innovative technology and innovative solutions can come out of this great country. However, having said that, there is also a fact that there are leakages in the system for which we as technology companies should be held responsible, if not legally. I don't know if there is any legal bill yet, but at least we should train ourselves. The government, government cannot access that data without by just soliciting or mandating a law. I think the data does not belong to the government. The data does not belong to Faisal Farooqi or his company, or for that matter, even Google or Facebook. The data belongs to the person who has submitted it voluntarily, or even, so there should be a very clear opt-out policy or removal of private or personal information. And it should be very simple. I mean, for example, Truecaller has large amount of personal data on people, their usage pattern, etc. Telecom companies have access to it.
I'll have to stop you here, sorry. Just trying to stick so that all we can hear from everyone. It's a complicated question, so obviously I'm not being fair here. But let's move on.
You're doing
we'll
right.
try
You're
to
doing all right. Yeah.
All right, Professor Jha, before I get to you, I have to say one thing, that Anuradha does join us from the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, but you also understand this is a live stream. People in Kashmir cannot even access and look at all of these things, which 2G is not the same speed. It's a little better than a dial-up modem, but they are not able to access all of this. So that is why we collect these lost voices of people what they are going through when they can't do telemedicine, when they can't stream so much of the stuff. What does it mean? And this is also because a large population, or almost 90% plus of Indians, access internet through mobile networks and not broadband networks. Very different from some of the other parts of the world. Professor Jha, I wanted to come to you. The intersection of growth on the internet as we see it today and history of Indian political thinking about its usage. You talked about J.P. Narayanan, you talked about history and current politics. We had ideas about development, science, education, egalitarian democracy, and we spent with various governments over 70 years developing those ideas. Now we have come into this period in the net in which power, which is part of the market that didn't exist at the beginning of our independence, and political authority, which has grown so much and knows how to use that technology for itself, and also the state and the central government's interaction. In your view, what should we be thinking now as the rules of our politics with respect to the internet? Digital sovereignty, protecting of data of Indians for use by Indians and Indian businesses are the core ideas of the current government. Whether they are good or not, but as far as they go, they're definitely not enough. What, in your view, should be the big thinking that we should be doing? Professor Jha, and I'll start your timer as well.
Thank you, Mishi. I'll not take much of your time. What I believe in this digital world, www, World Wide Web. This web doesn't spare anyone. As I told you in the beginning, that if my video could be shown in Pakistan and Prime Minister's video could be shown in China, I think we must realize the new reality. Number one. Number two, I must also say that there was this poet, Aga Shahid Ali. He wrote a collection of poems called The Country Without a Post Office. If he was alive, he would have written A Country Without an Internet. I agree with Gulshan Rai ji and to an extent Manish ji when saw cyber security issues. You know, surveillance could be understood. National security, I mean, many countries in the world are struggling with it. But surveillance should be an exception, not a pattern. If it acquires a pattern, that's problematic. And then surveillance becomes an instrument for tyranny, more and more tyranny. I'll just give you a case from Delhi before I conclude. Before I can add another sentence. One of my colleagues in Delhi University, he was summoned by Delhi police yesterday. Together with me and all of us, we were part of the NTCA protest, which Constitution of India has given us the right. He was called to yesterday, and you know, he was asked, you met Mr. Jha on this day, Mr. Falana on this day. You spoke to him on this and that. You know, if it could happen in Delhi, I shudder to think what is happening in Kashmir. Now, these are worrisome issues for democracy. No, it's about the health of democracy. And finally, I would tell you, Mishi, you know, initially when the 5th of August 2019 happened, there were stories galore, numerous stories. Doctors lost contact with their patient. Many of them critical patients. I'm just arguing for the fact, a simple argument, that in a society, if you are perceived, if the state is perceived as an oppressor, that shouldn't happen. You know what happened? Doctors, student, teacher and student relationship. If all these important relationships are broken, journalism is broken, and Radhaji would tell you. So what do you live with? You want to live as a vegetable. People in Delhi would not accept that. Then why people in Jammu and Kashmir should be forced to accept that? No, just last sentence. No Indian citizen, wherever they are living, they should get that in their own nation, they are occupied people.
Great. Dr. Rai, I'm coming to you now. You have done a lot of basic architect of the policies and laws around the net. When I started reading first things about you and you talked about export control. You had been talking about those things in the context. Your fundamental notions have become significant parts of the infrastructure of Indian society. You now see, as I do and others do, that phenomena of data collection and reaching of data motivated industry into every aspect of life. What do you think of basic concept this kind of legislation should take into account? I also would like to ask from your point of view, because people are not able to understand this thing about what is it that can't be done at 2G speeds but can be done at 4G speeds. What has to change that it will be okay to restore that kind of speed? So I'm asking you bigger questions also, because you've not from thinking to writing laws to thinking about cybersecurity as relative to foreign nations. You have done a lot of thinking. And I know you have profound ideas. So all of it for your 2 minutes to answer this.
Mishi, you have done a very challenging question to me, and you yourself ask a very wide, encompassing question, and you're asking me 2 minutes. It's very unfair of you. Okay, but you sound to me. You said I have done the basic structure, and you said so many things. To me, it sounds that if you are accusing me for the structure. Look, I can tell you.
Sir, I'm applauding you. Sir, I'm saying your wisdom.
The two lawmakers are here. The two lawmakers are here. And I have seen government of both the lawmaker party there. Both the parties were out to suspend me when I wrote a law. No one was defending me in the law. Today I mentioned to one of the honorable lawmaker of a ruling party. Look, you were willing to suspend me when you came to the power. You're looking to suspend me. But today, same provision which I wrote in 2005, imagine you are using that provision to ban 59 apps. Okay. So, you see, laws are written in a good sense there, in a good spirit there, in a good meaning purposes there. Technology is developed. Unfortunately, in this world, there is an incentive to develop a technology. There is no incentive to stop misuse of the technology. See, the second part is very, very important there. And that's why I was saying preamble that it's a multi-edge kind of things there. Nothing wrong. You need to have a law, and I'm sure the honorable member of parliament, particularly Mr. Tiwari, will agree with me. He's a legal luminary there. Interpretation of Article 19, whether 1 or 2, is going to be day by day more difficult as we move towards the technological innovation. There the problems are there. I think you said me in the larger sense. The larger sense is that the political parties need to come together and at least decide on they must have the consensus on certain core issues and burning issues, which includes the national security, which includes the surveillance aspect there, and interception aspect. All the political parties has to come have a consensus there and include the foreign policy also there. If we don't bring the consensus in certain core issues there, we are going to be in a deep problem. Party A comes to the power, party B comes to the power. They have done. I don't want to spell out there. See, if you look at any advanced society there, the Americans do far more intelligence, far more penetration into individual life than they are accused to do that. They are no less than any other communist country which we talk about. I don't want to name it. I have seen literally myself. I literally seen, and you have seen what was the name which was coming up, that Snowden kind of things there. I had a brief in 2007 in the Americans there, and I came back and told everyone, look, they are doing everything. I think, but they don't, the entire thing, surveillance is done to check the crime, terrorism. They don't use against the political, don't use political kind of things there. So I think we need to have a consensus among the political parties It's very unfortunate, the topic which you said, the 4G shutdown. It's very, very unfortunate. I do agree with you. Okay, but then we need a political consensus. We need a consensus among the political parties that this should be the criteria, this should be the process, and this should be the objective there. And that is
Okay,
where
sir.
everyone has to come forward. Thank you.
Sir, I asked you a broad question, so I gave you a little more time. I am going to say, go to Anuradha. I will say this broad consensus, it sounds like a chief technology office, which is above and beyond parties, which decides, okay, this is the direction the country needs to take, and we agree on all of this. Because citizens just want to live their life without interference. And why I'm going to Anuradha is also because she has now experienced something which Mr. Tiwari or I as a professional like doing, that is being in courts all the time, but not the citizen. The litigation rigmarole, Anuradha, you approach the Supreme Court to challenge the internet shutdown. Then you get a judgment in January after the shutdown, the communications blockade is in August. And you were told that the sword of Damocles should not be hanging over journalists. But then again, we are back in circles. We are still at special committee. Everything should be public, but now we can do sealed covers, but then another date, then another, everything else. So now instead of the government having to prove necessity, impose a temporal limit, which it has failed to do, we are still going in all of those rounds and rounds again. Now, where do you see this entire, in the context of what is being told to us and what is the reality on town? Everybody in the world faces cyber threats, but speed throttling, crushing the right of people to talk or just be connected, when everybody is told, here is digital India. 500 million people we are celebrating, but as Professor Jha said, अगर अभिन्न अंग हैं तो भिन्न क्यों हैं?
Yes, Mishi. I mean, why after the court verdict, and then there have been other petitions in court, and we are not only moving in circles. I think gradually we are losing hope of anything delivering on the ground. The very judgment, I mean, it did. The one I got in January did come on a positive note, but it wasn't implemented. There were certain ambiguities which allowed government the leverage to circumvent around the order. But more importantly, it came 5 months later. We are talking about fundamental rights here. We're talking about basic rights of people here, and the court is taking 5 months to decide on that. That itself is reflective of what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir. And as far as, surveillance is concerned, surveillance and intelligence have been part and parcel of Jammu and Kashmir for the last 70 years. I recall as a student a college student in late 80s reading 1984, George Orwell's 1984. It seemed so surreal, but I could still relate to it because we grew up in that culture of agencies and intelligence network and surveillance. That time it was man-made. With the introduction of technology, it's become more and more sophisticated. It's become more broad-based. Everybody can be brought under surveillance without the person even knowing that he's under surveillance. And the problem with these kind of mechanism controls, whatever justification you take, whether it is in terms of security of women, whether it is in terms of security of borders, the problem is that the bias of the person who's holding the levers, that will sneak in and that will become the deciding factor. I mean, you look at the internet, you'll see a lot of women receiving hate mails and abusive words. Are we taking action against that? That's all guided by bias. There are hate speeches, nobody would want to take action. But the moment you criticize the government, you'll be charged of anti-nationalism. And why this should be worrying, not only for people in Jammu and Kashmir, it should be worrying for rest of India. It should be even worrying for rest of the world, because within India, at least, Kashmir is becoming a testing laboratory for rest of the country. And I don't need to elaborate on that. If you see the recent months, how things have panned out in the anti-CAA protests, the way restrictions were imposed or things that happened, I think that design is being replicated, and it is extremely worrying.
Great,
Thank
Anuradha.
you.
I'm going to come to Mr. Tiwari, Professor Jha, both of you. You are lawmakers. This thing about what Dr. Rai said, that there are certain norms, certain principles, or basic concepts which we all need to agree upon across party lines. Because whether it is him who is in the government or businesses or even civil society people, for certain things which are so infrastructural like the internet, as well as you said, the 14, 19, 21 rights, they can keep changing as and when the government changes. So do you have ideas about it? Because as a citizen, what we also see is that there is a lot of, as Anuradha said, the internet gave us this way of speaking to power, which was unprecedented. And thereafter, now we see a ton of, whether it is arrests, whether it is other kind of punishment, or it is organized harassment, and dissent is curbed. Thereafter, we also see the citizen feels that I want to go about my business. Why aren't you making laws to protect me against attacks from outside the country, but also subject the surveillance within the country to rule of law and make it targeted and not always on mass surveillance? Don't use facial recognition tech, which everybody else is banning, but you are telling me will be used against me. So where do political parties stand here? And why do we see that at least for example, Aadhaar, there can be, the state wants to give identity to everybody, but then the yo-yo between voluntary, mandatory, and citizens are always confused about security, privacy. They want to go about doing their business, use these products, and leave the job to you. So tell us how that job can be done better, and also in a way which runs across party lines. Mr. Tiwari and Professor Jha, you can unmute yourself.
Go first.
Manish bhai, you begin.
I thought since we have an election in Bihar, I should give you the first right. No, Mishi, but coming back to the question that you raised, like we saw the rise of the internet in our lifetimes, I fear the demise of the internet in our lifetimes. I see the balkanization of the net as a reality which stares us in the face. And the people most responsible for that balkanization are going to be those who actually swear in the name of free speech. Already we've seen now for over a decade and a half the territorialization of the net by China. And then recently you saw the ban by India on 59 Chinese-made apps. So therefore, if this trend is going to go forth, you are going to see a Shia net, a Sunni net, a cynic net, based upon spheres of hegemony, spheres of civilizational linkages. And those intranets or large intranets are not going to be talking to each other. And this is primarily because the stakeholders' consultation on rules of engagement in the virtual civilization has not gone anywhere because it has been blocked by the big five of the cyberspace world. The alphabets, the A, B, C, D of the internet world These are the guys who actually are going to be ultimately responsible for the balkanization of the net. Because if you do not want the balkanization of the net and you want that free speech be protected, you have to agree to rules of engagement which apply across the virtual civilization, across Westphalian entities, and across nation states globally. And I think that's a conversation which, unfortunately, because of revenue imperatives, because of various other very, very narrow corporate considerations, has been deliberately subverted, if not sabotaged, by these people over the years. And they are providing the incentive for the state to step in. And once states step in and start regulating, because remember, what you are seeing is only the flora and fauna of the virtual civilization. The hardware of the internet, or the hardware which underpins the internet, is still controlled by the state. The gateways, the routers, the undersea cables which carry data. And so therefore, I think, all advocates of free speech who really want to preserve the World Wide Web as we see it currently, in fact, it is already getting truncated, must put this conversation on top priority and fast track it immediately. On your second question with regard to surveillance, I think that's something, as Anuradha ji was saying, at least I have taken to be a sequitur since I grew up on the trench lines of the battle against militancy and terrorism in Punjab. So therefore, agencies, fake encounters, people disappearing in the name of national security, at times for legitimate reasons, although they cannot be legitimate reasons which violate the rule of law, but reasons which were given to be legitimate, is something which has been the state of play in Western India, or the states which border Pakistan, now going back many decades. You see, insofar...
Sir, I'll have to stop you here, only for time.
Yeah.
Professor Jha.
I'm Ishi. I'll not take much of your time. My colleague, Manish ji, my esteemed colleague, in fact, we have differences of opinion, but at the same time, we work together. State control, what he said, I agree. But then the state is also being controlled by big capital. Let's not deny that, and let's not remain in a denial mode. Now, your basic question was how as lawmakers, Mishi, the problem is that we used to have majority in parliament. Congress had majority. Now suddenly a majority in parliament is perceived to be a license for a majoritarian parliament. So when you get that license for a majoritarian parliament, your idea is not to engage in debate, deliberation. What probably Radhakrishnan said, that the parliament is not only for passing bills, or it is a deliberative body. Now, government, in a number of questions, I must tell you, they don't even acknowledge in parliament that agencies are involved in surveillance. Whereas when the data comes in front of the agencies, I think all of us, and it cannot be done by political parties, Mishi. It has to be done by the civil society. Today, what Anuradhaji was saying, today what happened in Kashmir is being replicated in the rest of the India. And if the rest of the India doesn't stand understand curbs, I think we shall be perpetually in a web camera state, a surveillance state, highest form of Orwellian state, and which shall not do good to anybody, including political parties, including civil society. And I think by engaging on a platform like this, by constantly drawing in questions, we can probably have a kind of ecosystem, a climate where we can have a pause button to that kind of surveillance state and look for a much more liberal outlook, whereby you take care of national security, but without subjecting your, without treating your citizens as subjects, which is happening in Kashmir.
Great. So obviously we've exceeded time. If it's all right, if I would just go maybe another 5-7 minutes. There are just so many questions. We've been bombarded with these questions everywhere. You can see I'm trying to get to various devices to figure out which where I'm being sent all the questions. But thank you for weighing in. If it's okay, I'll extend a little. If anyone has to leave, please let me know. But I just wanted to bring in.
I'll have to
yes,
leave.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, perfectly. Sir, if you have any closing remarks, that would be great.
Nothing.
Or maybe
the only closing remark is thank you very much. I loved being here, and let's have more of this conversation, not only for Jammu and Kashmir, for the very idea of India.
Great. Mr. Tiwari, you had to leave also, and is there a...
Yes, Mishi, unfortunately, I have 7:45.
So if you have any closing remarks, that would be great. Perhaps we'll just have some closing statements from everybody and wrap this up.
The only thing
this is just...
The only
yes.
thing to say is that you are in a geography where you can drive the conversation with regard to the multi-stakeholder process. I would like to submit that you should use your good offices and you should use your organization to drive that conversation to protect free speech on the internet. Otherwise, it is going to become an endangered species. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for joining us. This has been a great pleasure of ours to have you here. And if you do and talk the way you did, you also know that more requests in future are coming your way. So thank you for joining us. Anuradha, did you want to make a statement? And then I'll move to Dr. Rai, Faisal, and Sairi. Can you unmute yourself, Anuradha, please?
Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I think I was talking to myself. We've been talking so much about surveillance. We also need to understand the impact of the surveillance. One is the psychological impact it creates on people and makes them completely powerless. And two, it empowers the government, which is already too powerful. It empowers the state even more. Absolute power, as they say, completely corrupts. So what it does is eventually it gives them enough leverage to turn people into robots, mechanical robots. Impact even shape how their lives are shaped, how the discourse is shaped, that they get that space and that leverage to control the lives of the people. Manoj Jhaji talked about, and very aptly so, that Kashmiris today have been living like vegetables, and literally so. We've seemed to have lost control over our lives. Somewhere, something inside us is dead. And I think something that kept me alive was, I think, going back to the court and fighting. I decided I wouldn't be dead before they killed me. So, some of us who are fighting back, I think we are fighting back with that kind of a spirit, with knowing that there is very little hope ahead. Thank you.
Hi, Mishi, I think your microphone is on mute. I think you'll have to unmute yourself and then.
Sorry, thank you. Dr. Rai?
Mishi, thanks very much. First of all, that's the word I want to thank you once again for such a enlightened discussion. But I can only say as a finishing line that we are going to be in a very, very complex scenario. And you can see, you are sitting in the US, in the East Coast, you can see the helplessness which was seen when the US Congress discussed with the four technical giants. You can see that the helplessness that government felt from their own companies, which they promoted such a giant, they become a tech giants there. The companies are itself ignoring. Not only that, companies are bringing a different kind of a problem between the Republicans and Democrats in the entire political structure there. So we are going to be in a complex scenario. Technology is going to bring far more complexity than we have seen because of virtualness kind of a thing. I think this is a time where the interpretation of the laws, what actions which will be taken by any government is going to be, it's going to be very, very subjective. I may criticize them, and next time when I come, I will support them. I think what I said, that we need to be very clear. Our priorities need to be drawn very clearly. The multi-stakeholder approach. Today we are in a multi-stakeholder approach. Every stakeholder has its own responsibilities, and they have to draw a Lakshman Rekha that this is the line beyond which they cannot go. If someone tries to distort, it's going to be very bad. And I remember, you see, there's a second law of thermodynamics, where they said entropy will always increase. Entropy means irregular, in order. Irregular order will always increase. And if you don't follow a Lakshman Rekha, if you don't follow certain order there, this entropy, irregularity, the disorder will increase regularly. And that's why I said I did not say broad consensus. I said national consensus. National is different than the broad. National consensus on certain core issues is a must. And if such is brought, you will not see this kind of a shutdown for which you held this webinar. It will be a different kind of thing. They will be able to negotiate. They will be able to bring the private sector along with them, and in the sense that there will be confidence that it will not be misused against the citizen. It will be used only to check the crime and terrorism rather than against the own citizens there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, sir. Faisal?
Yes, Mishi, I believe that the internet was founded by people at the universities, and I think it is still true. As technology company founders, we all believe that people by nature are good. And hence the entropy of the third law of thermodynamics. I think any disorder will give rise to a new set of people who will provide order. I also feel that technology companies have a huge obligation in terms of protecting the balance between freedom of speech and expression on the internet, as well as controlling crime, online harassment, trolling, etc., etc. There are technologies that are available to control that. The big giants, as Dr. Rai said, were grilled last week in the United States, and a certain sense of sanity will prevail. I also believe, and this is going to be my closing line, that freedom of expression on the internet is sacrosanct. We should not dilute that. We should not compromise on that. As proud citizens of India, as proud citizens of a great country, I believe that every court, every government, state government, central government should uphold this right of freedom of expression on the internet for all citizens of India. Thank you.
Great. Sairi?
All right. So thank you so much. And I think, look, internet's a precious resource. And I think if we look at what's happening around the world with US and China and India, clearly it's being fought over. And I think we shouldn't let politicians take it away from us, and I see this huge tussle. I think the only free democratic space left to citizens worldwide is under threat, and I would like, especially young people, founders, technology people, investor community, to not let this go away. So we don't want nationalization of the internet, and it's important to let it be for what it was made for in the first place.
Well, succinct and wise words as always. And Radha, did you want to wrap up? Sorry, you're on mute.
I wouldn't want to add. I think Sairi aptly ended it on a very good note. And I agree with her. Absolutely agree with her. Internet was made for the good of the people. It wasn't made to control them. And I think it shouldn't be that way. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. There were people from Kashmir who told us that if they could, they would have joined. And in some parts where they would have liked to join, but it wasn't possible. I am very, very grateful to Anuradha, to Dr. Rai, Faisal, Sairi, Professor Jha, Mr. Tiwari for joining us, to LiveLaw for partnering with sflc.in, to sflc.in, to the great team there, Prashant, Radhika, Sanjeev, Raju, Purva, Kushag, there's so many names, Mamta, everybody at that team for inviting me to ask questions. I'm sorry if I cut you off or if I didn't let you complete. That's on me. Please hold me responsible for that. I was just trying to get too many things packed in a very short time. This is only a beginning of the discussion. Like Faisal and Sairi said, keeping what the core values of internet sacrosanct and building pro-IT humanity. The founders, the youngsters, India has such a great population. We are technically sophisticated. We can also build pro-IT humanity. We don't have to build surveillance architectures, whether it is surveillance capitalism or otherwise. Like Dr. Rai said, there has to be some consensus on core issues. And citizens can't be subjects. There is a social contract. We all live together. There is rule of law. Constitution exists. And like Mr. Tiwari said, if we are moving towards a place where in this century, with the net as an underlying reality of everything, it is clear both from the Chinese behavior and Chinese ambition that we are going to get a chance to see how the net behaves in totalitarian ways, how it moves so deeply into the lives of people that whoever is inside the net is inside every life. Now we also have a period, and we need a period in this century, how we preserve the aspects of life which is not under the monitoring, sanction, and control of power, which does not matter whether that power is state power only or state power in cooperation with the powers of surveillance capitalism. So there is a plan for totalizing, but that plan is a simple plan. There should be a plan for not totalizing. The plan for keeping civil society and digital private life of human beings is a really tricky problem. But all hard things are hard. They can't be solved in a tiny discussion like this or being in silos if we keep talking orthogonally at each other. 365 days of no to slow internet, throttling speeds is not the way we want anybody to be treated. And that's how we have treated a part of our population. We can't think of this as industrial policy only or competition policy only or free speech and expression policy only. We have to think of this as how do we protect a zone of private life from technologies which are becoming increasingly biased towards totalitarianism, centralization of services, collecting data and creating concentration in power on both sides of the state. And no state lines, as Dr. Rai said, which threaten to eliminate, it wants to acknowledge it. So no state lines which threaten to eliminate the song of ordinary control of human life that we call freedom should be allowed to exist. If we all work together and we understand that our private lives are sacrosanct, our values are sacrosanct, we can all work together. Thank you again to all of you. You guys were amazing. You girls were amazing. Everybody who identifies it, whatever gender is welcome here, who joined us. Everyone who has different views, we are Happy to hear from you and to continue different discussions. Join sflc.in and internetshutdowns.in online. LiveLaw, who were our partners, great partners here, all of you who are our partners, and everybody who is listening from various parts of the world, different geographies, different time zones. Thank you. This is in solidarity with freedom and privacy and private life of everybody, for which all of us are working together. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.